Good morning and welcome to the podcast. We're going to do something different today. It is a finance podcast, but we are going to be talking to Tom Dahri, who is former law enforcement, and he's going to tell us about how he looked at the world and continues to look at the world in terms of law enforcement and how we can learn from that and adapt that to finance and equity analysis. So maybe a quick couple of words, if I may, Tom, about you. And please then come back and tell me more, because we're very interested in your background. So Tom has a storied career, none of it from the high finance and investment world. But this is why I wanted to get Tom on this kind of podcast. What we can learn from Tom and work and translate, and how we look at and analyze the world of finance. Tom joined the Metropolitan Police in 1989 and quickly became known for his ability to solve complex problems. During the 7/7 attacks, he led the Special Branch Intelligence Cell within the Central Command complex at New Scotland Yard, coordinating real-time intelligence. He was the only Special Branch officer in its history to receive a commendation for the Uniform Command for his work as liaison to the Public Order Planning Department. Tom later played a pivotal role in the 2012 London Olympics as part of the newly created International Liaison Unit, established to coordinate with law enforcement agencies from 204 participating nations and the security teams of the world's 50 largest corporate sponsors. In this role, Tom was responsible for designing and delivering the operational framework before, during, and after the Games. Tom was the senior investigating officer in the Met's Homicide Command, where he led the mass casualty recovery team at the 2017 London Bridge terrorist attack and the Grenfell Tower fire. Tom and his team used complex investigative and analytical techniques using forensic evidence, witness interviews, and so many other factors to build a case, identify the perpetrator, and eventually capture, try, and incarcerate in the name of justice. Tom, welcome to the show. What an incredible career you've led. And of course, we'll also want to learn about what you're doing now as well. But maybe you can give us a little bit of the background that maybe I've missed out on, and hear your thoughts on what we're trying to do here. Really translate from your experiences to finance.
Thank you. Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's the first time I've ever done a podcast before. So it's quite interesting and a bit of new technology for me, and I'm a bit Luddite at times, but moving with the times now. But yeah, thank you very much, and hope I can add some insight to my world if you want.
Yeah.
So I joined. I'm from Yorkshire.
Yeah.
I'm from Yorkshire, Indian heritage. Grew up in Chappertown. I grew up in a period in an area called Chaptown in Leeds, which was, unfortunately, became famous for the Yorkshire Ripper, because found two of his victims in areas where I used to play. And it was weird that 40 years later, end up becoming a detective and investigating murders. So it was just a weird kind of system that turned around. It's wheel of fortune, I suppose. But it's come full circle, and I became an SIO. But yeah, I did that, special brand counterterrorism. I've served in Afghanistan on counter-espionage. I worked at Downing Street as an intelligence officer for the protection of the Prime Minister. I've worked on other covert operations. I'm ex-firearms officer for diplomatic protection. But most of my career has been homicide. And homicide is problem solving. And it's the best. I say it's the best. It's probably the most important and most honourable role you could have, to investigate the death of another human being and provide answers and be the voice of the victims, because they've lost their voice. We are there, the voices. We have to find answers, and we have to find answers for them, and which we did on many, many occasions.
That's a fantastic kind of starting point, and thank you for that. And I guess, for the purposes today, just kind of wanted to understand from your perspective how you approach a case, You're normally the first, after the case has occurred. Unfortunately, you are then the first team that will turn up to a case, to a site. How is there a typical thought process? Is there a typical process that the team employs? And love to hear how that kind of operates.
What give it is a higher view to a certain extent. So you count it like an investment part of kind of portfolio or part of it. You're gathering information. That's what you're doing. Yeah, if you treat it like that, what you're doing is getting as much information as you possibly can from various organizations, from people, witnesses, and so forth. So in an analogy between finance and investigations, you look at reports and you look at the sector data. Then you'll have an hypothesis. You have an idea of what you think's there. So what do you do with that hypothesis? You test it. You test the assumptions. You test the rates, the rise, relationships, and so forth. And with that hypothesis, you eliminate the white noise. You eliminate that white noise, and you focus down onto the key areas of what you need to do. So that's forensic recovery, set evidence, witness identification, CCTV. All these pieces come together, but it's not one person; it's a team that does it. While I was the SIO, I pulled all these together with some great members of the team, some great managers there, and ultimately, with my decision was the direction of where we go with the investigation.
So Tom, we've started with, if you like, the factual base. So you've got the evidence that you've gathered from site, you've got the witnesses, you've got the forensics. So all of those are facts. And in an analogy to finance and company analysis, if you like, what we're trying to do here is capture any kind of publicly available information about a business. That is then kind of coordinated, put into if you like, sort of a factual spreadsheet analysis of the years that have passed. And the next thing that we need to kind of think about is, what are the drivers that could be out there in the marketplace that will determine price that the company is able to charge, the demand that the company is able to get, margins that it's able to get because it's controlling its costs. So those are now, if you like, sort of forecasts, or it's a bunch of guesses that we're going to make. So after you've reached that sort of factual knowledge that you've picked up from the site, what do you do then? How do you build your forecasting, if you like, or guesswork, which is a bad word, I guess, but how do you build that
I
on
would
top
say
of the
there's an easy
facts?
answer to it, but there is no straightforward and easy answer to it. And there's a lot of detectives, and I'm an okay detective. I'm not a brilliant. I wouldn't say I'm the best in the world. However, I'm a good detective in respect to I go with gut instinct as well. A lot of things is gut instinct. If you think something's wrong, okay, let's test it then. Why is it wrong? Or have you just got an upset stomach? So these are things that you're looking at and testing when you have these investigations. How do you go beyond it? So if you go beyond the initial investigation and you look at a wider piece, then you look at risk mitigation. And so what you look at is the history of the perpetrator, the history of the victim as well, and the witnesses. How did they connect? What's the connections? And then you can build a bigger picture around that. And then if you look at, I'll give you a prime example: domestic violence. Domestic violence, unfortunately, it's very prime in the UK and in other nations, but it has a peak certain times of the year, and certain incidents take place, say around Christmas, around football, where alcohol is involved. So you have that. So what you do is because you've got the trends previously, you can see when it's going to happen. So what you do then, you put your resources within that kind of environment, and put in the street, so you educate people about the risks around it, and that way, hopefully, you can reduce that, mitigate that risk around domestic violence, and potentially, which sometimes could lead to homicides as well.
I think you touch on a really interesting point there, which is behavioral. This is, in our world, analytics are based on numbers, are based on sort of guesstimates around those numbers, etc. But we do very little, I think, as financiers and investors in behavioral. personally, I think that plays a huge part, particularly in early stage investment when you're dealing with a business that it's in startup mode, which is very little in terms of numbers to go by. But then it's all about the team. It's all about the management team and everything that goes with that. Um, as you invest in more mature businesses and listed businesses, then people tend to rest more about the numbers and less about the characters. But I think it still plays a huge part in terms of what the management team looks like. I mean, look at characters like Elon Musk or Bill Gates back in the day. You know, these folks, or Steve Jobs. You know, these folks really drove their businesses. So how do you kind of work with behavioral sort of markers, if you like, that help you to solve
Um,
a
Very good
murder?
question, actually. Behavior analysis. It's an art. It's an art form. It really is an art form. I think the FBI at Quantico did some great work around there because unfortunately they've got more serial killers than we do, or recognised serial killers than we do within the UK. But what the learning comes from there, we've used within the culture policing environment and within UK policing environment, and that helps us understand how crimes happen and how people behave and rationale behind it. So rational thinking. There's a lot of criminology. I did my masters in crime and risk management and security and risk management, and there's a whole plethora of books you could read about behavior analysis and so forth. But one of the great things about you have now is there's you can use you can use scientists for example within culture policing, but also within UCL where they've got a great behavior analysis department there, and other sections within the further education. And with those departments, sometimes we use their expertise to understand how people have done certain things, maybe not within a live case itself, but in post events to support how we investigate and learn from each investigation and what's happened, and so we can mitigate or help us try and reduce that happening again, or find perpetrators before it actually happens. Um, I'm going back to uh, what's the film, Tom Cruise film where you're trying to predict crime before it actually happens. But
Yeah, yeah, no,
but
it, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, it
that's what you're trying
escapes
to
me at
do.
the
You
moment,
are
but
trying to
yes,
predict crime and trying to prevent it before it actually happens. So you got the prevent program that's going on with counterterrorism. That's trying to prevent people from committing terrorism offences. It works into a certain point, but there's other elements it could do better. Like going back to your behaviour analysis piece, um, the world has changed significantly now. Yes, you've got your spreadsheets and everything else. However, the drivers of AI within the sector, not just within private sector, but also public sector, is it's a game changer, because yeah, AI learns, but it learns from humans. It learns from their behaviors, but it's the input you put within that environment, so their learnings within that environment, and then you can guide it to what you want to do. It's not perfect, but you can put um, rules in there to basically guide it. Say if this happens, if that happens, this is what you're going to do. But it's a I could talk for hours about behavior analysis. It's one of the things I've been looking at anyway.
yeah. Well, would you say, Tom, Minority Report, by the way, would, would you say that therefore the behavioral patterns are almost like a fingerprint, that there are certain traits and factors that constantly, I mean, as you say, the Quantico sort of FBI analysis, presumably a serial killer is around typical things that a serial killer would do. Um, and they'll do that in every case almost. Does that work in a similar way for single murder
Um,
cases
well,
or
burglaries.
burglaries?
Let's talk about. We'll talk about homicide first. With homicides, most homicides in the UK are not serial killers. Stephen Port was a serial killer, and but his focus was in the LGBT community, and their victims were there, and eventually he was caught. But if you look at the most common homicides as such, and I say common, I use that term very loosely, and I do apologise to people if they find that offensive. Is most homicides are rare. they are rare. Homicides occur. There is very, very. You look at TV shows. You look at planning goes on. This happens and that happens. They look at forensics and no, it's spontaneous. Most of it's spontaneous. Most of the homicides dealt with were knife-related crimes, sometimes firearms, sometimes bludgeoning with blood objects, but they were instantaneous. Very little was planning there. There was no pre-planning. Very little pre-planning actually. No, there was no pre-planning. That's wrong. The planning for other crimes, so like robberies, but not pre-planning for homicides. So you go back to you talk about fingerprints. Investigation is slightly different, but in our methodology of investigations, it's the same. So we have a clear methodology that's been developed through with Quantico, with the FBI, with the senior investigating officers course led by the College of Policing, and it's a great course with great instructors. And I did mine at Hendon at the detective school when it was there, when it was not there anymore. But we were the best in the world around investigations, and it's great. But what we looked at was different types of homicides, and we looked at how we analyzed that data, how we analyzed crime scenes, how we analyzed witnesses, how we analyzed how we used the media to try and get witnesses. What's that methodology to gather witnesses? So there is a fingerprint of one. I suppose say there is a fingerprint within more serial crimes, but you won't see that fingerprint until 2 or 3 murders have taken place.
Yeah.
So they had, and their mistakes are
Yeah.
at the first points, because they think, they got away with the first time. Okay, that's where the mistake is. How I can do it better next time, and they go on and go on. And one of the challenges of, and America's not my thing and anything like that. So if I get these pieces wrong, I do apologize to any American viewers. Is because it's a federal state, and sometimes because the state is massive, you could move around quite easily and commit murders around the country and not get picked up for decades, and which has happened before. But within the UK, that's a little bit more challenging. So you go back to the Yorkshire Ripper example. He was a truck driver, Peter Sutcliffe. He travelled around from around the country on truck drive, and his victims were picked up around the Yorkshire area, so Yorkshire Ripper. But we didn't have massive forensic capabilities, CCTV capacity, or anything like that, or ANPR, so automatic number plate readers, like the cameras on the roads. So we didn't have that. So it was good old-fashioned boots on the ground, which eventually caught him. However, they missed opportunities. He was interviewed 3 or 4 times, I think it was, because his vehicle kept on being spotted, but they didn't link it up together. So post Peter Sutcliffe, post Yorkshire Ripper, which was a paper card system of investigations looking at trying to identify what methodology people had done, the Home Office large major inquiry system, the HOME system, was created, and that basically integrated all the intelligence information for an investigation, and it allowed investigators to basically pull pieces together much quickly. And that way you can identify fingerprinting in kind of methodology.
Understood. And I guess the sort of way I would look at it from an investment perspective is again, either you're a big character as a CEO or founder in a listed business, and the way that you've invested in the past, and I think of Steve Jobs in this as a prime example, that behavior of his, which was really taking a tangible product and just turning it on its head and constantly looking for a very innovative, very revolutionary way of producing something. And together with Ives, his designer, they came up with very revolutionary things. And funny enough, this juncture, under Tim Cook, you could argue that everything is sort of ossified. There's very little level of innovation. There's very little thinking out of the box. It's really just working with it's evolution as opposed to revolution. They just keep working with the same product and just putting a few extra bells and whistles, but not really kind of creating something outrageously new. So So that, at the mature end is something that we can definitely use. That sort of behavioral element is really important. But at the startup for me is even more important, because ultimately look at what that founder's done before, because whatever they've done before and whatever happened to that business
Yeah,
may
yeah.
well happen again, right?
You look at the first thing they've done. You always look at the first thing they've done, because that will determine, or that gives you, not determine, but it gives you an idea of where their path will take you, and
Yeah.
how they're going to do certain things. Um,
Yeah.
they've if they've never had any previous history of violence, then why would they commit violence now? If there's any history of abuse, yes, they may commit violence, and that may lead to a homicide. So
Yeah.
so you do look at those early years and early days
Yeah.
as well, or early years and past history, criminal history as well as social history. Are they a loner? Are they any social interactions? What's their relationship like in the past? So you go to that kind of depth.
That's really interesting. And I think, again, that's really useful from a venture point of view, because you can get, there's not much you can pick up on, but when you're talking to founders, when you're talking to management, really concentrate on their character, because that's what's going to drive your investment going forward. Um, when we were preparing for this podcast, I think you came up with something really interesting, which was, and I know you didn't mean it in that sense, but you said, don't fall in love with your first suspect. It's really interesting to try and kind of unravel that a little bit, because clearly certain evidence and witness statements, etc., could lead you on to a what seemingly is a very obvious suspect. And again, for I just sort of reflect that back to investment. When I'm looking at a company and I'm looking at its growth opportunity, and everybody's telling me how fantastic this business is, and it's in the right place, it's doing the right things, and I just jump on board. But and very very few people really question what is everybody's perspective, right? And step back and think differently. So tell me again, please, how you would think about that obvious suspect and what you have to do to stop yourself
One of the
from
challenges everybody, one of
running
the
with that.
challenges that as an SIA you would have is a fast arrest. Is because if you don't arrest them quickly, then there's a risk of community. Are they going to reoffend and so forth? And you want community reassurance, and you're getting badgered from the senior management from above and saying, right, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? And then you've got reassurance for the community, reassurance for the family. Then unfortunately, sometimes the Home Office get involved, and ministers get involved. You just get pounded. But you've got to have a tough skin. So, however, that should not force you to look at a suspect. Your role as a senior investigator or investigator, you look at everything. You look at the bigger picture. You have to look at the bigger picture, because what happens, or what could potentially happen, is when you have an investigation, someone is arrested. One of the questions will be asked of you if once you go to court, what other suspects were there? Who else did you look at? If you looked at them, why are they here? Or what did you do to mitigate them? What did you do to eliminate them? So you have to go into each individual lives, and eliminate them. And that elimination either be by forensic or by technical or eyewitnesses, CCTV. So, for example, I would say, someone said murder was in London. Someone saying I was in actually Bristol at the time. Well, how can you evidence that? Oh, well, I was at home. Okay, how do you evidence that? Okay, their car was parked outside, the AMP around there. We checked that CCTV. We also look at their cell site analysis as well. The phones, has that moved? Has that car moved? Maybe they got the train. Okay, we just then look at the train stations as well. What trains were traveling that period as well? So you can get into that detail, but it depends on your resources. So that would be the nth degree you could go into. However, as our resources are very limited, you, as the SIO, you have to make a strategic decision and say, I'm confident that this person is not the suspect, and our focus should be on this person here, person B. However, if new information comes to light, then we can refocus on person A or person C or whoever else. But we have to focus on person A. But then if it all changes, it depends on what information comes through. It's so fast moving that it's blurry at times. Your head gets spinning all the time. But you have to analyze this data as quick as possible without faltering. You'll make mistakes. But the best way to resolve those mistakes or help mitigate those mistakes is chat to your cohorts, chat to your support network of other investigators, of your detectives, junior detectives, and chat to your people on your senior detectives, because there's always a review comes in after a month if a homicide hasn't been solved, and they help you look at the whole picture again and say, let's have a look at this again with another perspective, another fresh pair of eyes.
Interesting. So it's really, that's a very interesting point at the end there, because, again, from an investor's perspective, maybe it's the right, once you've done your
Yeah,
analysis,
100%.
it makes sense to bring the colleague in and just to kind of
You become
sense check
so
it, right?
absorbed, you become so numb to that information that becomes your world, and it becomes that's your reality. And because you're invested in that, you've vested your time and research into that. However, when someone comes in and looks at it from a second pair of eyes, you become quite defensive and say, right, okay, no, that's my research, that's my work, and why should I be challenged on that? But they're not trying to catch you out. They're just trying to help you and say, look at the
Yeah.
world in look in a different lens and look at it on a different angle. And that's what the review team does. And in regards to financing, it should be exactly done that. Have the core people in there, and then have a support team that looks in and says, this is, yeah, we will support that, or have a look at it a different way with a different lens and say, okay, what about these considerations?
Very interesting. And getting a little bit sort of more granular on this. So how does probability play in terms of sort of resolving a case? When it comes to a set of assumptions that you're going to have to make above and beyond those facts, what does probability do as a play on this in terms of what you know, is it 50% or better and you go on to the next step, or does there have to be a level of almost certainty before
I
you
don't know
move on to the next part?
probability, but it's a level of certainty and
Yeah.
confidence within. You could
Yeah.
classify as probability, but I wouldn't say what kind of percentages. We just work on the level of evidence that we have within each part, because that determines the direction of the
Yeah.
investigation. So, because you can always have 90% move towards a certain suspect, and suddenly forensics comes in and says it's not that person, and that's that 1%. And so it totally changes everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you cannot be so focused on one part.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
probability is probably not the way I would look at some of the investigations. 50% this, 60% that. It's what the evidence presents, and you can say I'm 100% sure it was him who did that. Maybe yes, if you've got eyewitnesses, CCTV, and forensics, you can say 100% that. I've been to cases where I've been to court. I've seen them stab somebody, 100% stab somebody, and they've got off with murder and claim self-defense. It's bizarre, absolutely
Yeah.
gobsmacking, absolutely gobsmacking. So you think you're
Yeah.
100% certain that they do it, and they did do it, but they got off at court. So it's just you can't predict everything. So you only can do what you only can do your best.
Right.
No one's perfect.
So let's talk about reporting. So you've got your suspect, you've charged the suspect, and it's court time, as you've said. How do you prepare for the court hearing effectively? How do you make sure that everything that you've collected is foolproof and sufficiently robust to allow
So
for a
all that
jury
evidence
to
gathered is
convict?
governed by the legislation called Criminal Procedures and Investigations Act. That's gathering all information, intelligence information, evidence, everything that relates to that investigation. And from that, we identify what material was relevant to what we call used and unused material. Used material is like statements, CCTV, and so forth. That gives direct evidence or supporting evidence. Unused material is I just saw a man walking down the street, but suspect, a white man walking down the street when the suspect may be Indian. So however, you still put that in there in some basic material in the package. But we work closely with the prosecution service, the Crown Prosecution Service. We have regular meetings with the senior management of the CPS and the case lawyers, and we put what's together is what's called a disclosure package, and that disclosure package is presented to the defence before the trial, and they have basically we lay out all our evidence to them, absolutely everything, and so they can put their defence together. And before the case goes to court, defence are entitled to put forward a defence case, and to say, to rebut our case. So when they've given us that material, the statement, I suppose, then we look at that statement and we say, okay, they said they were in Yorkshire when the murder happened in London. Okay, then we have to go up to Yorkshire and so find out what everything was around that. And so it becomes a secondary investigation to support or rebut his defence statement. So then we present it all within to the CPS. We come up with a strategy, or with the defence barrister, or with defence barristers, prosecution barristers, or how we're going to present it. And these presentations could be one thing we will never do now. I'll tell you now, we will never show pictures of victims. Never. They're too horrific, and they're too traumatic. Not just for the jury, but also for the family as well, because the family will be in the courts. So we have to have images, drawings, graphics. So graphic departments provides that, and those are post-mortem photographs we won't show. What again with graphics we'll have is just showing ports of entry of either a firearm and exit wounds, or stab wounds, location of stab wounds on the bodies, and bludgeon marks. So we try and make it safer for mental health for individuals involved, because it's an investigating homicides, not just investigating, but sitting in a jury and so forth and witnessing these things. It's traumatic. So it takes time and takes its toll on people. So we have to make it as presentable as possible and easily to understandable as well, because you cannot have complex work that you go to a lay jury who have no understanding what's going on. So you have to. We have been very intelligent people that we go on juries and everything. I'm just trying to make it simplistic. We don't dumb it down. We make it just easier to understand. So it's. And the last thing I'm doing is trying to say we don't have intelligent juries out there. I've seen some mad juries out there who come up with some mad decisions, bizarre decisions. However, we just present our case to them. As soon as we hand it over to CPS, it's out of our hands. We just have to present our case to them.
Right. And I guess, from a perspective of the investor side, that if you're an organized institution and you're presenting to an investment committee, it's similar. You have to have everything in place, and so that you're going to be questioned about elements of the investment case, but you'll have that covered, even if it's not in the memorandum that you're presenting to the investment committee. That's at a very institutional level. But even as an individual investor, before you're investing in a company or in a fund or in an ETF or anything like that, you should really be thinking about, even if it's to another family member, to present your case and allow them to really sort of come back at you with all sorts of different assumptions that you may not have thought about. Because I presume in the process, in the rehearsal, if you like, before you go to CPS and to the defense team of the perpetrator, that you've kind of rehearsed what could they come back with that you may not have considered. And I think that's a really important point. Don't just run with your own thoughts. Bounce it off somebody. Make sure that all the assumptions are in place. Is that fair?
You can't be complacent. You cannot be complacent. Yeah. You have to test everything.
Yeah.
Go back to your investment analogy. Why did you come up with that theory? How did you come up with that figure? What system did you use to analyze that? So when I was when I was junior officer, we found fingerprints for a burglary suspect, and we lost some of the paperwork. So we had to call the scientists in to show the evidence and what the process was of how the fingerprint was taken and everything else. So you've got to go into that kind of detail. You don't have to explain it, but you need to have the knowledge of it. And so that when you are spoken about it or challenged about it, you can talk about it with knowledge.
Tom, this has been absolutely fascinating, sort of an understanding. I was kind of thinking, is there really a connection between analysis in the law enforcement industry and finance? And I think that this brief chat of ours has really brought up some really interesting connectors, and we can learn from your industry. And I think that we do need to kind of, the thing that sticks out to me more than anything else is whatever evidence you've gathered about a business or about an investment, just go and talk to other people about it and make sure that you're not going down a stream on your own because you've convinced yourself that a business or a strategy makes sense. Bounce it off.
Yeah.
And that
If
seems
you're
to
too
be
emotionally
something
involved in it, you
central
get
to your
lost.
industry as well.
So you're an investor, you're investing in a company. If you're too emotionally involved, you do not see the pitfalls. So you have to
Yeah.
take a step back. You have to have an
Yeah.
advisor. You have to have a sounding board, even if it's your missus or your best mate. It's a sounding board that they say, well, yeah, it's a great idea. However, have you thought about it in this way? And that's what I do with my wife with my current work. I said, yeah, think about this. But what about this? And she'll come up with various ideas. I'm like, when I bounce ideas with yourself, Ben, about
Yeah.
various things, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
However, what I would say in regards to our transferable skills is don't discount cops. Cops have such transferable skills into the private sector, and I think it's articulating that skill level and how it equates into different sectors. That's the challenge that many cops don't have, and it's I think that's a shame because you got cops like me, not me as an example, but I've seen cops who with 30 years service, or even with 5 years service, who have left and for various reasons or retired. But even in that short time, they've got great skills. They've got analytical skills. They've got problem-solving skills. They've got great communication skills, management skills. They are there to be used and supported, and they're there to support private sector. They are not just bobbies on the beat. Like, we go back to my first when we did the opening statement. When I joined the Met, before I joined the Met, I just thought being a cop was just walking on the beat with my lid on, with my tit on, and that was it. I didn't think anything else. I very rarely heard about CID or anything like that. As soon as you walk through those doors and you walk out of Hendon or walk out the various training establishments, your world's your oyster. It is the depth of experience, the depth of the organisation is unbelievable. There are departments I never knew existed. Even when I went into special branch and counterterrorism, there are departments that nobody's ever heard of. So you just do not look at things in a singular lens. You've got to look at a wider lens. And again, with investment, don't just look at one single lens. Look at the wider picture and have a fisheye kind of view and have that third eye supporting you and helping you make those assessments.
No, I don't believe that you've just done your first podcast because I think you're a professional podcaster. You've kind of taken us from the discussion and sort of taken us into that sort of entrepreneurial nature of trained, disciplined policemen, and taking that discipline and applying it to the private sector. So with that in mind, please tell us, Tom, what are you doing nowadays? What are your entrepreneurial sort of journey
Yeah,
at the
thanks, Ben.
moment? And we'd
So
love to hear about that.
one of the challenges when you leave the organisation is trying to find yourself because you've had the comfort blanket of an organisation that you become. That's not institutionalized, but you've had that comfort blanket. And for me, was trying to work out well, you don't need a murders detective out there investigating murders in the private sector. So that's the police's job. So you have to pivot your skills. So I've moved towards fraud, counter fraud. So I've done various counter fraud qualifications, which is great. But also I've started developing an AI program called Sentinel, which is a counter fraud program, which helps organizations. One of the things I learned on my counter fraud course was what's called fraud loss measurement. And I was thinking, what's that? What's FLM? That's when auditors come into an organization and basically looks on your books and identifies fraud that's taken place. But it's taken place historically. So if you lost that money. So what I thought, hang on a second, that's for enterprise level, and they cost tens of thousands of pounds. But the biggest victims of fraud are SMEs, small businesses. And it's massive, billions and billions that happen every single year, not one single year, a lower number of years, but every single year. So I thought, what can we do to support SMEs? Because my dad had a company in Leeds. He was a victim of fraud. He lost it. One single fraud, bang, gone. So fraud impacting on SMEs is massive, not just financially, but it's just everything. So I started developing an AI program and looking at fraud loss measurement tools for SMEs. So using various mechanisms, and so what it does, it looks through your invoices and your receipts before money goes out to identify anomalies, and including behavior analysis. Why is this invoice going at 2 o'clock in the morning? How's that? Is it the same person applying this invoice or signing this invoice up? So all these things gets picked up, and before any money goes out, it comes up to a human, and they can make the assessment and say there's something wrong with this. So that's what I'm working on, and that's a modular system, and that allows me to add other elements to it, like ESG module. I'm doing an investigation module as well. I'm adding loads of different things to it. So that's where my plan is, and that's where I'm moving towards. I'm moving in that direction.
Fascinating. Please keep us in touch with how that's going. I'm sure listeners would want to hear and potentially even invest in the business if you're getting it to that point. Tom, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, because it's absolutely fascinating insights, and so many investors who hopefully listen to this don't really get access to the sort of world that you came from. So thank you for those insights, and let me leave sort of the last words to you in terms of any kind of last thoughts that you might have.
Don't just be blinkered. Don't look at just the figures itself. Look at everything else. Because if you just look at what's in front of you, you'll miss the bigger picture. So you've got to have a wide view perspective of everything that's taking place. Things that are happening on the other side of the world will impact on something that's up in front of you.
Brilliant. Tom, thanks very much for your time, and hopefully we'll get you back on very soon.